Have you ever noticed how Gen X doesn't really announce itself? Millennials get the burned out but hopeful label. Gen Z is digitally native and emotionally fluent, whatever that actually means. Boomers are the workaholics, but Gen X? They're just kind of there. The shrug, the side eye, that quiet smirk from the corner of the room while everyone else fights for the mic. Maybe you are Gen X. Maybe you grew up letting yourself into an empty house with a key on a lanyard around your neck. Figured out how to fix the VCR before you could drive. You remember a world without the internet, and then you just adapted to one that runs entirely on it. No fanfare, no TED Talk about the transition. You just did it. Or maybe you're younger and you've always wondered why the Gen Xers in your life seem so weirdly self-contained. Why they don't overshare, don't panic publicly, don't seem to need the constant online validation loop. How they can be fiercely loyal but emotionally private at the same time, and somehow that doesn't feel like a contradiction to them. Here's the thing, none of that is random. The psychology of Gen X is basically the story of what happens to a brain when it grows up wedged between two completely different worlds. And honestly, it explains a lot more than people give it credit for. Let me back up. Picture being born somewhere between the mid-60s and early 80s. You're growing up while divorce rates are climbing, the economy keeps shifting under everyone's feet, corporations are downsizing left and right, the Cold War is still a thing, and technology is just starting to whisper about the revolution it's going to cause. Your parents are working. A lot. Institutions, the ones your parents' generation trusted, feel shakier than they used to. And the message you absorb, even if nobody says it out loud, is pretty clear. Don't rely too much on anyone. Figure it out. So you do. Psychologists talk about attachment patterns forming early. When caregivers are inconsistent, or just genuinely unavailable because of work hours or the cultural norms of the time, kids tend to develop a much stronger sense of self-reliance. Not because they're choosing independence as some kind of philosophy. Their nervous system just learns, if I need something, I'd better handle it myself. For a huge number of Gen X kids, independence wasn't a personality trait, it was a survival adaptation. Full stop. That's where the whole Latchkey Kid thing comes from. Walking home alone, making your own food, watching your younger siblings, solving problems without an adult stepping in because there wasn't one around to step in. On the surface, that builds competence. Underneath it, though, it's wiring a specific psychological blueprint into your brain. A brain shaped by early autonomy gets really good at self-regulation. It also gets cautious about depending on people. And here's what I think is the most misunderstood part. That caution looks like emotional coolness from the outside. But it's not coldness, it's more like calibration. Gen Xers tend to measure trust slowly. They don't rush into emotional exposure. They're not posting every mood shift for public consumption. Not because they don't feel things deeply, they absolutely do, but because vulnerability in their early environment didn't always lead somewhere safe. Sometimes it led nowhere at all. So they learn to process internally, quietly, on their own terms. And then there's the cultural context, which honestly doesn't get talked about enough. The 80s and 90s were drowning in irony. Sarcasm wasn't just humor, it was armor. Early MTV, the grunge movement, that whole yeah, whatever energy. Psychologically, irony works as a shield. If you can laugh at everything, nothing gets full access to hurt you. That sarcastic streak so many Gen Xers carry? It's not apathy. I'd call it emotional judo. You redirect the force instead of absorbing it. Now let's get into work because this one's interesting. Gen X entered adulthood right as the "give the company your loyalty and they'll take care of you forever" myth was falling apart in real time. They watched their parents pour decades into jobs that vanished overnight. Restructuring, layoffs, the whole deal. And they internalized a very quiet realism about it. Trust the system, but not too much. Research in occupational psychology backs this up. Your formative economic experiences deeply shape how you handle risk and what you value in a career. When your early adulthood coincides with instability, and theirs really did, you tend to prioritize flexibility, transferable skills, financial caution, You get pragmatic fast. That's why so many Gen Xers adapted from analog to digital in a way that seems almost invisible. Handwritten letters to email, landlines to smartphones. They didn't grow up with this stuff, but they mastered it. Not with flashy enthusiasm, just with quiet competence. And quiet competence might honestly be the defining Gen X trait. They don't usually perform their skills. Don't narrate every win. Don't brand every hobby into a side hustle identity. There's often this subtle discomfort with self-promotion because their formative years rewarded capability, not visibility. You just did the thing. You didn't live stream it. But there's something deeper going on emotionally, and I think this is where it gets really worth paying attention to. Being stuck between generations does something weird to identity. Developmental psychologists say identity forms partly through contrast. You figure out who you are by figuring out who you're not. Boomers had their post-war prosperity narrative. Millennials and Gen Z have strong digital and social identities. Gen X? They get called the forgotten generation. And I don't think that label is as harmless as it sounds. When you grow up without a loud cultural spotlight on you, you learn to define yourself from the inside out. You stop waiting for collective validation because it's clearly not coming. You build your own compass instead. This is probably why so many Gen Xers have such a low tolerance for performative behavior. Not the curated authenticity you see on Instagram. Not the algorithm-optimized vulnerability. They want the real, messy, human version, or nothing. Their nervous system is basically tuned to detect bullshit, which, when you think about it, makes sense. They grew up watching institutions wobble. Trust had to be earned. Let me ask you something though. If you're Gen X, do you sometimes feel like you've had to be the steady one? The reliable one? The person who holds it together for your kids and your aging parents and your coworkers, all at the same time? There's a reason for that too. Gen X often sits right in the sandwich generation spot, raising kids while also supporting older parents. That dual pull reinforces the same independence they learned as children. The message comes back around. You're the bridge. You hold this together. That builds resilience over time. Genuine, tested resilience. But it also creates a kind of emotional fatigue that nobody talks about because, well, Gen X doesn't really talk about it. And this is important. Resilience in psychology isn't about never feeling overwhelmed. It's about continuing to function while overwhelmed. Gen X has been practicing that for decades. But the world often mistakes resilience for invulnerability, and those are very different things. They're not invulnerable. They just learn not to broadcast every crack. Okay, let's talk about technology for a minute because I find this genuinely fascinating from a cognitive perspective. Gen X is the last generation that had a fully analog childhood and a fully digital adulthood. That matters more than people realize. Their brains developed deep focus before constant digital stimulation became the default. They remember boredom. I mean real boredom. Staring at a popcorn ceiling on a Saturday afternoon and inventing entire worlds in your head because there was literally nothing else to do. Neuroscience actually shows that kind of boredom strengthens creative networks in the brain. When external input drops low enough, your default mode network kicks in. That's the system tied to introspection, imagination, autobiographical memory. The daydreaming engine, basically. Gen X grew up running that engine constantly. So yeah, they use smartphones and social media. But their baseline mental wiring includes a memory of slowness, of waiting, of being completely unreachable for hours, and that being totally fine. And that memory genuinely affects their stress response. They tend to treat digital urgency as optional, not existential. That's why so many Gen Xers don't spiral if a text goes unanswered for a few hours. Their nervous system wasn't trained to read delay as rejection. They grew up in a world where waiting was just what you did. Compare that to younger generations who've had instant communication hardwired since childhood, and the psychological baseline is just fundamentally different. Now, here's where I think it gets even more interesting. Because Gen X straddles eras, they tend to carry this dual consciousness. They understand traditional structures, but also question them. Respect hard work, but refuse to romanticize corporate loyalty. value family but stay realistic about relationship flaws. It creates this personality style that's pragmatic but emotionally nuanced in ways that don't always show on the surface. They're not easily swept up in trends because they've just seen too many cycles. Fashion comes back. Music evolves. Moral panics flame up and burn out. Their skepticism isn't negativity, it's pattern recognition. They've seen this movie before. Psychologists would call it cognitive flexibility combined with experiential wisdom. When you've witnessed enough change, your brain starts building templates. You recognize echoes. You stop being surprised.
That's also why Gen X humor skews dark. Not because they're pessimistic, because they've metabolized complexity. Dark humor is often a sign of psychological integration, actually. It means you can stare at uncomfortable stuff without falling apart, which is honestly a pretty underrated skill. But here's the paradox, and I think it's a real one. All that independence can make it genuinely hard to ask for help. If your entire identity was built on "I've got this," if that's been the operating system since childhood, then admitting you're overwhelmed can feel like betraying your own wiring. Your brain whispers you should be handling this alone, even when letting someone in would actually make you stronger. I've seen this play out so many times, and it's one of those patterns that's hard to break precisely because it used to work so well. The same traits that make Gen X strong, self-sufficiency, skepticism, resilience, can also create real isolation if they go unchecked. Emotional self-containment can drift into emotional distance without anyone noticing, including them. But here's what's kind of beautiful about it. When you really get to know Gen Xers, when you actually listen to their stories, you find this profound loyalty underneath. They may not overshare, they may not check in every day, but they show up. Years can pass without contact, and the bond is still intact, fully intact. That's attachment security expressed differently. Not loud, just stable. There's also something worth noting about the middle child dynamic. In family psychology, middle children tend to develop strong negotiation skills, independence, and the ability to hold multiple perspectives at once. Gen X mirrors that pattern culturally. They can translate between boomers and Gen Z. They get analog values and digital realities. They're basically cultural interpreters, and maybe that's exactly why they don't need to shout. They're used to navigating quietly. If you're Gen X, you probably don't even think of these traits as special. They just feel normal. Of course you handle things yourself. Of course you don't post every emotion. Of course you roll your eyes at hype. But take a step back for a second. That eye roll, that's discernment, that privacy, boundary awareness, that adaptability, cognitive agility. Psychology tends to frame generational traits as stereotypes, which, fair enough, they can be. But underneath stereotypes are shared developmental conditions, and those conditions shape neural pathways, coping strategies, and the stories people tell themselves about who they are. Gen X's story is one of transition, and transitions require a kind of flexibility that honestly doesn't get enough credit. They had to learn new software mid-career, adapt to totally different parenting philosophies than the ones they were raised under, navigate shifting cultural conversations about mental health, gender, race, identity, all while holding down the responsibilities nobody was going to handle for them. That's not apathy. That's endurance. And yet, because Gen X doesn't demand recognition, they often just don't receive it, which is its own kind of quiet loss. So let me just say this directly. If you're Gen X, your quiet strength matters. A lot. Your ability to hold tension without making it a performance is genuinely rare. Your capacity to remember a slower world while functioning at full speed in a fast one, that's psychologically sophisticated whether you think of it that way or not. Your skepticism protects you from manipulation. Your humor metabolizes stress in ways that are honestly kind of impressive. And your independence? It doesn't mean you don't need connection. It means you learn to survive without it. And those aren't the same thing, even though they can feel that way. Maybe the real psychology of Gen X isn't about being forgotten at all. Maybe it's about being foundational. Bridges don't shout, they just hold weight. But even bridges need maintenance. So if you see yourself in any of this, the self-reliant kid, the adaptable adult, the person who's been quietly holding it together for everyone around them, maybe it's worth asking, where could you let yourself lean a little more? Where could independence soften into interdependence? Not because you can't handle it alone, because you shouldn't always have to. Strength isn't just about carrying everything by yourself. It's also about choosing when not to. And if you're not Gen X but you love someone who is, maybe now you get them a little better. The sarcasm, the privacy, the steadiness that never wavers even when it probably should. It's all part of a psychological story that started long before anyone had a smartphone or a hashtag. Every generation carries its imprint. Gen X's is subtle, but it runs deep. The analog childhood, the digital adulthood, the eye roll, and the steady hand. And maybe the most powerful thing about them is also the simplest. They don't need to be loud to be strong.